what's going on exposes, not just on Capitol Hill, but in America, a sickness that I think that we have in this country. You can't, in my estimation, in the scenario we're in, to be the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee at this time, I think that he should step down.
Well, Gregory Meeks talking about John Conyers, Democrat, the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, longest serving member of Congress right now, and someone who is facing a lot of accusations, allegations of sexual harassment, some of them very specific, other people mentioning it in court documents. The Detroit Free Press coming out with an opinion editorial headline that Conyers must resign. Whatever Conyers' legacy will eventually be, his tenure as a member of Congress must end now. We reached this conclusion with an incredible amount of disappointment. Even if Conyers could prove that he did not make inappropriate advances toward his former staffer, there's no defense for having used dollars from his congressional office to settle a claim. It's a betrayal that breaches the most fundamental trust that exists between a public servant and the people that person represents. It's a tragic end to his public career, but it's the appropriate consequence for the stunning subterfuge his office has indulged here, and a needed warning to other members of Congress that this can never be tolerated. And this is being talked about a lot up on Capitol Hill and around the country. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief for the Weekly Standard, Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today, and Charles Hurt, opinion editor for the Washington Times. Susan, every day, we've said this week, there is another development here, and this John Conyers story continues to gain steam.
So what is it with you guys? I mean, so many men doing so many really, really stupid things. And now we're finding out about them as John Conyers is discovering, to his dismay, I'm sure. And, you know, there is some support among Democrats. The first Democratic member of Congress, Kathleen Rice from New York, has called for him to resign. I think there is some concern among Democrats about John Conyers and also about Al Franken. You know, one of the concerns about John Conyers is that he is the ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, and if there is a move against President Trump, if there's a scenario where Democrats win control of the House, he would be chairman of the Judiciary Committee. That is something that does concern Democrats, apart from these sexual assault and harassment allegations. Well, and not only the allegations, but the second part of that, Steve, and that is the payout and this hush money, if you will. These charts, so we've put them up here. The Congressional Office of Compliance, total since 1997, 264 settlements awards, and you see the numbers granted per year back to 1997, and the dollar amount is at $17.2 million. Now, the Weekly Standard had a little bit of a scoop on the Conyers part of the payout stuff.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, we are clearly at the very beginning of this part of this scandal. I mean, I think we're going to learn a lot more in the coming days and weeks about the money and the payouts, and as you say, the hush money. We had a report today at the Weekly Standard from our Jerry Beer, who looked at the specific payouts from Conyers' office, which, as you noted, came from his office and not the Office of Compliance, but totaled the same amount that BuzzFeed originally reported. And those payments were labeled severance payments, but they went to a temporary employee, which doesn't make a ton of sense. Temporary employees don't typically get severance payments. So this is the beginning, not just with John Conyers, but I think more broadly, of understanding exactly what's been going on in Congress and getting to the bottom of it. And I think perhaps allowing people who have been the victims of this harassment to speak out.
Charlie, isn't there a growing call to find out who was paid and when and by whom?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that I think that Steve is exactly right. This is just the beginning, and all of these questions need to be answered. And just today, there was another new report from Melanie Sloan, who's a very influential lawyer in town who has spent her career standing up to powerful interests, who makes claims that when she worked for John Conyers, she was abused. She said she was not sexually abused, but she did recount one time walking into his office and he's sitting there in his underwear. I don't know exactly how that doesn't quite fall into that category. But anyway, the fact is that she said that she rang all the bells, all the alarms. She went to Dick Gephardt's office and she alerted everybody to this, and they dropped the ball. Well, all of that should be investigated, and we should find out where these breakdowns occurred, because it's very serious.
And let's be honest, this policy, this process, if you're an accuser to go through up on Capitol Hill, is really, it's arcane and it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, and to think that so many of these people are sitting around lecturing the rest of America about how they should handle these sorts of situations, it's pretty comical.
All right, let's play the soundbite from the candidates down in the Alabama Senate race, Roy Moore and Doug Jones.
I think the establishment, consisting both of Democrats and Republicans, want to keep the same people in there. They didn't want a conservative rebel that they couldn't manage. And, you know, I've just never been manageable. I don't plan to be manageable.
They're the same ones, by the way, that are simply saying, oh, pay no attention to the allegations against Roy Moore. He's a Republican. By God, we'll vote for him anyway. That is wrong, people.
So the Real Clear Politics average of polls down there, and we keep showing this, but it's the average of recent polls, has Jones up 0.8% there, and it's the average of the recent polls down there. The Q poll had a question, would you still vote for a candidate accused of sexual harassment if you agree on the issues? And you can see the breakdown here for all voters, 27-62. For GOP voters, and those are the ones that matter on the Roy Moore side, 43-41. Those numbers in Alabama are probably more than that, Susan.
Well, you know, you look at the polling, and nobody can predict, I think, who's going to win in this December 12th race. But I think it is clear that the question will be who is energized to turn out and who is just so disgusted that they don't turn out. And I think it is hard to know that as of now. Now, Doug Jones has just, I think, today put up a very tough ad that uses the name and pictures of the young women and the teenagers who have accused Roy Moore of targeting them when he was in his 30s. And so I wonder if the voters in Alabama, who are heavily Republican, it's a very red state, will decide that they are still going to stick with Roy Moore because he's the Republican nominee, or whether they will either stay home or even vote for the Democrat. This is one I think is nobody's in a position to really call this race.
Yeah, Steve, last word on this. The communications director for Moore resigned. People were reading through the tea leaves what that meant. Our own Dan Gallo speaking with someone with the campaign saying, unfortunately, John Rogers, who resigned, just did not have the experience to deal with the press the last couple of weeks, and we've had to make a change, saying that the barrage basically is what led to it. It's a bumpy ride to that election day in December for the Moore campaign.
It is, and then they later put out a different statement casting his departure in slightly different terms. I can't even get the story straight about why he's leaving. Look, the Quinnipiac poll has to be one of the more depressing moments in recent American history. Republicans have traveled a long way since the days when they were appalled and disgusted by Bill Clinton's behavior. I think they were right to be at the time. I wish more of them would be today. You know, you look at the ad that Susan mentioned from Doug Jones' campaign. It's very simple. It just has pictures of the young women who have made these accusations, I think credible accusations against Roy Moore, and basically tells their story very briefly. I think it's a devastating ad in its simplicity, and I wouldn't be surprised to see if it either keeps people from going to the polls or changes minds.